Realpolitik is politics that are coercive, immoral, or Machiavellian.
Mr. McCarthy, have you no sense of decency, sir?
Begins with one word, realpolitik.
All right, well, welcome to Realpolitik. My name is Paul Holden, here with Chris and John as always.
What's going on, guys?
Happy to be here.
And we got a special guest today. We got Zach Moss from the Zach Moss Show. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, no worries. What's up?
Yeah,
Hey, Zach.
Quick
Hello.
intro of Zach. You were a former strategist for the Young Turks and are currently the host of the YouTube series, The Zach Moss Show. Have been documenting some of the Portland protests, really from the ground level, in the shit in front of the big scary police officer shooting tear gas. So I've been watching your videos and you're definitely out there, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely.
Very impressive.
It was a very weird transition going from something that was originally not really locally focused to something so national. Like I was helping with the Democratic elections and covering that for the Young Turks. And now everything where I live is now on a national spotlight. So it's like going from one thing that was captivating people's attention to now here, like right outside my house. It's like, God, what a weird life it is that we are living at the moment.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, I'm here in Nashville, and we randomly get into the news for things like we have the Grand Wizard of the KKK's bust in our capital. That was just a bitch to get rid of.
I was going to say Confederate flags on the State House at South Carolina. So, yeah, I would rather be a little bit more protesty sometimes. Yeah. But living in the South, it's tough. You know, we've had some, especially towards the beginning of the BLM movement, this second time around, not the original one, but we have had some, some marches. There was some, burning of cop cars or breaking windows and stuff like that at the very beginning, like that Friday night, Saturday morning. But since then, it's been pretty peaceful. There's been a couple of small gatherings, like at the State House or outside of police departments. But it's really quieted down a lot, especially when you compare it to Portland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. So kind of what is everything looking like from your guys' perspective? I'm very curious about that.
It's interesting, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about in the media too, is that I think there's a very interesting representation of Portland, on your CNNs or MSNBCs or New York Times and WashPo.
Right.
Where it is just your like black bloc kids with like their masks and backpacks and just clashing with police officers, tear gas everywhere, border patrol just picking people up in vans. From the news, it seems to be extreme and crazy. And I've been following like Robert Evans from Bellingcat, and he's been on the ground as well. And from what he's been saying is that it's the closest thing he's seen to war without live ammunition, with how crazy it's been at times. So that's really my perception of it, which is what I want to talk to, because I don't know anyone in the region. I would love to hear like what is
our Pacific Northwest, I was, before all of this really started happening, I was surprised to kind of know the history of Oregon as kind of a white only state. And some of that history, because I was like, what the hell are white supremacists doing in, I could see maybe like out in the middle of nowhere Oregon or out in the middle of nowhere Washington. Like, I get that isolated, but that they would be coming into Portland or something, I was like, that doesn't sound legit to me. And I guess to find out that actually there is kind of a white supremacist contingent in some of that area.
Yeah, definitely. It's such, Oregon, is such a weird place. It's kind of a circus in a funny way. Yes, there's definitely originally in Oregon, the KKK came here and set up base because of, how, like, let's just be honest about it, how white it is, really. Right. And I think there's a whole, rhyme and reason as to why that is. But yeah, and so it's so ironic that now there's such a hard, like, liberal scene here. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that everybody here is so conscious of the history, and everybody here is like, hell no, that's not us. And so they're kind of working to try to reverse that. In terms of what it looks like in person, it is so fascinating how I think the coverage kind of covers like the general coverage that everybody sees. It covers the big things that are happening, obviously. But what I think is the most interesting facet are the little conversations that just kind of happen here and there. So, for example, there's somebody who decides to throw a water bottle over a fence and try to hit a police officer. Then you'll have a dialogue that I'm trying to film the whole time where somebody turns and is like, "What? Why did you just throw that?" And the person who threw it turns and says, "Well, they're going to hit us anyway, so why not try to hit them first?" And then the person who responded again by saying, "Well, hold on a second. That's actually the motive for why they claim to hit us to begin with." And so there's a whole dialogue going on back and forth. And also something that's also funny that isn't covered is little tiny nuanced details regarding the police officers and kind of what are they looking for in order to use force. There's sometimes where there's a massive fence around the Justice Center and they say, "Hey, if anybody, literally if a single person out of the thousands there touches the fence, just touches the fence, we will use force." We're like, dude, there's thousands of people pushing forward. So even if you don't want to touch the fence in the front, you're literally getting forced by hundreds of people behind you forward. And so you're eventually going to run into the fence. And you're like, oh God, like, oh shit. So you're trying to like, get stuck against the fence and like, oh, there we go. That's it. And so they'll turn on their intercoms and say, "Everybody, this is an illegal protest. Everybody must leave now or you're getting gassed." And God forbid you're in the front or in the middle and you get gassed. So there's people around there. It's absolutely insane. So yes, if you guys have any sort of questions regarding that, I hopefully will have an answer for you.
Yeah. So if you've communicated with the law enforcement officers there, are they usually pretty forthcoming with ahead of time with like their line in the sand, like touching the fence or what it is that's going to trigger them to actually use more aggression?
It's a hit or miss. A lot of times it's a hit or miss. In the very beginning, they were a little bit more upfront about it. They'll say things like, again, the fence, don't touch the fence. But, I would say it's really dependent on the day. There's not a lot of consistency. So, for example, the very last protest that I had gone to, which was a couple days ago, as a matter of fact, the police officers there, they used force. And I was there for several hours up until that point, and I didn't see anything happen that would warrant any sort of force. There wasn't any sort of violence against them. And as a matter of fact, I would go a step further to say that there was security lights that they have on the very front of their helmets. They're mad at protesters for using lasers to shine in people's faces. So what they would do is there's these security lights that are so strong, it kind of acts as like a flashbang, which they used plenty of those there. So if you get hit with this for a second, it's physically painful on your eyes, and they'll just turn it on and they'll just flash it in everybody's face, and they'll stand there and they'll just literally stand there and just start like looking at people and start flashing it in their face, just as kind of a vindictive move. So in that particular situation, there wasn't really anything that we were told not to do leading up to the use of force.
Wow.
Why do you think there is such a variance in how they respond from day to day? Is it just to keep you all off guard, or do you just think there's no real leadership, and so it's kind of more of a systemic problem, right? That there's no one that kind of has the reins of this unit, and so the individuals are just responding based off of whim, pretty much.
To be honest with you, I don't think they have a single clue as to how to handle the situation. And one of the issues that they're running into is the fact that, as opposed to other cities, in Portland, the mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, is also at the same time the police commissioner. So when we're wondering why isn't there any tangible justice reform, well, that's because he's also the one head of the police department as well. And so that's a kind of a negative look for him. And so when we're talking about the policy, there's no substantial policy that us as protesters, we can wait for. So for example, okay, we can't do X, Y, and Z, or else there will be the use of force. And so, no, sometimes they'll lay off and they'll kind of let protesters do what they will. And other times they will like mock us by the very first protest I went to, they'll mock us by putting their gas canisters in their in the weapons they use for the rubber bullets. They'll mockingly point it at us and start laughing amongst each other. And if they're getting filmed, they'll pull
Jesus
up their
Christ.
phones and pretend to film us as well. Yeah, and
Right.
it's so apparent to where I even said the very first video I ever took, I said, hey, they keep pointing the gas can in my face all day today. I feel like they're going to shoot me with it. And eventually they did shoot it. And you couldn't catch it on camera. It was too fast, but you could hear me jump. And I'm like, whoa. And I looked down and you could see a gas can go right by me. And it's like rattling on the ground. And so kind of a long answer is no, there is no specific standardized policy that they use, which can be proved throughout the days and how they've changed their use of force.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, too, how the police can escalate these situations. Because, I mean, even just here in Nashville, we had a massive march that was about 20,000 people back in July. And as we were marching through the city, everyone was peaceful. Nothing was happening. No one was, attacking any barriers or anything like that. But around us were police officers that were only on bicycles. But the moment that we got to the main business strip, they had lined the roads with cops in riot gear. And that was the only time during the protest that protesters began to get agitated and started screaming at them. And it was the only time when I saw protesters pushing up against the cops. And it almost feels an escalation to be there in riot gear and to be expecting these things. But especially if they're sitting there and pointing their guns at you, what do they expect to happen? Like everyone just to say, oh, well, they have this tear gas can, I'm going to back off. It seems like it's just going to agitate everyone more.
Oh, absolutely. There was even times where they pointed their gas can in my, like literally probably from like a 10-foot distance. I was walking with a camera and I'm dressed up. It's clear that I'm a part of media at the time. And I'm walking around doing my thing. People usually leave me alone for the most part. And he pointed in my face and he starts yelling at me to turn around and start walking away. And I'm walking away. And then he runs up on me. And then he points it in my face and I'm like, why are you pointing this at my face? I'm following directions. I don't understand what you're getting. First of all, you can't shoot that in my face. It's a gas can. So let's just be clear about that. Second, I don't know what you're trying to do other than intimidate me. And it wasn't until I put my camera in his face to where he dropped his camera. The same thing actually happened with a police officer with their riot batons. There was a cameraman and myself. So we're both walking and the cameraman and myself, we walk up to a police officer. And we walk up, we're about 10 feet away and we stop. And we said, hey, we're just trying to figure out like, where do you want us to go? Because we're trying to walk back and follow instructions. The police officer runs up, just baseball bat swings, just decks one of the cameramen. Just right, I think he got him in like the shoulder or something, just decks him and then shoves him over. And then the cameraman runs away. And then he comes up and he cocks his arm back and he's about to deck me. And I'm like, dude, I literally have a camera in my face too. So if you're going to bust my camera, but I'm going to catch it on film. And it wasn't until I put the camera in his face as well to where he literally just like mid-swing just stops. And he's like, oh, what do you want? And I was like, I'm trying to figure out where you want me to go. And he's like, and he points to a police car a block away. He's like, go that way. I'm like, okay, are they going to arrest me if I walk over there? And he's like, no. I was like, okay, because I'm going to quote you. I have you on camera now. I'm going to quote you on that. So if they arrest me, I'm going to say that I followed your instructions.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, they let me walk away. And then they kind of harassed me here and there. But yeah, their tactics are very vindictive is the best term that I can use, because some of the things that they do are absolutely just not professional. A little girl got shot in the face with a rubber round that was just supposed to bounce off the ground. It just point blank shot her in the face and she was next to me. Yeah. So it's like when we're discussing how people become radicalized and that's a part of my education right now that I'm continuing was like extremism. And it's like, well, yeah, dude, watch a little girl get shot in the face and tell me if you still feel very good about the police department in Portland.
I mean, it's insane how much damage those bullets do to like, somebody's chest or stomach or something like that. Getting hit in the face. I mean, you lose your eye if you get shot near your eye.
Yeah.
You lose it.
Yeah.
So that's insane. So Zach, I kind of got a two-part question. So let me go ahead and start with the first one. What is it about Portland that has been able to sustain? I mean, the protests have been going for 60 days now? Longer
over
than
100.
that?
Yeah.
Over
100.
100?
Yeah.
Holy shit. So, so I mean, that's a great. I mean, that's a third of a year, right? I mean, that's an impressive That's an impressive amount of time for a protest. In America, we don't do that. So what is it? Is it the mix of, we're in the midst of a pandemic, you have a whole lot of people who are unemployed or underemployed or, working from home that can just sustain this development. But I mean, you can say that's happening nationwide, right?
Mhm.
So, and like I said, here in South Carolina, Charleston, Columbia, Greenville, you don't see that. You don't see that in North Carolina. Now, the South is mostly where I kind of focus my lens. So maybe, of course, there's a century or two of of things that happen that make the South the way it is, right? But what is it about Portland compared to the nation that this is still happening?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that. Also, as like a side note, like half my family's from the South too, so I know exactly what you mean. They're from the
All
deep,
right, yeah.
deep Alabama. Oh yeah, I
There
know
you go.
exactly.
I mean,
I know what you're
and Deep
talking about.
South is a
Mhm.
different beast than even South
Yeah,
Carolina, North Carolina. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. But
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
so what is that? I'm sure that of course there were some protests in LA still, but Portland we hear about in the
Yeah.
news, right?
Yep, I know what you mean. So that's actually, that's a funny question because there's like a two-part answer to that question. So the first would be kind of what is the average person in Portland like who are doing these types of protests? Well, generally they're younger individuals and they're a part of the left. Generally, they're kind of democratic. Like I'm a democratic socialist, which I like to state kind of like where my lens is and my kind of biases. And so they're coming from that, and then farther left as well. And so what happens is they're already mad about many reasons. One of which is the fact that they feel disenfranchised over the fact that they don't have a political candidate that they believe that properly represents them. So that's something that's not even criminal justice related. That
Right.
has already been building up and accruing, where politics is one of the most popular things to talk about before this was even a thing. And so you kind of amp everything up, and you have the fact that, obviously who's the president. Now, in addition, if you're talking about the psychology of kind of radicalism and how that kind of changes everything, which I studied this in the Middle East too. So it's fascinating to see how it escalated there versus here and commonalities. But you have a lot of factors, but all those factors come from something called like an emotional breakthrough, where somebody has a type of emotional vulnerability that is achieved through a very traumatic experience. A lot of times that happens from the death of a family member, like your father, your mother, your son, things like that. But then in addition to that as well, you have unemployment. So unemployment in Portland is higher than the rest of the nation. It says in the US, it's around 12%, which it's usually like 1.5 times that. In Portland, it's more like 14. So in reality, it's probably somewhere above 20%. Most of the youth
Well, there's
are
a huge
unemployed.
service industry, right? In Portland. So, and in a pandemic, you can't do
Yeah.
services.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. There is a whole lot of service industry jobs here, which not a lot of people actually know about. And so what happens is you have that type of emotional desperation. 33% of renters, or 75,000 people in Portland, are almost homeless. So when the mortgage freeze and the renter freezes up, they're going to be homeless. And there's already 3,000 homeless population, individuals as well. So when you stack all of these different variables up on top of a group that already feels politically disenfranchised, they're already like, screw it, what else do we have to lose? And so by the time they feel that there's this type of injustice going on inside the US, on top of a fact that we're already from a city that is built on white supremacy, everybody pretty much just mutually snapped at the same time. And so now it's to the point where the people who go to these protests, they walk in knowing that they might get stabbed or shot that day, and they're cool with it. Like that's a thing that everybody kind of agrees that everybody's fine with.
Yeah.
Which is insane. And I mean, the violence is just going to further radicalize people too. So in just my personal experience, I was in the Bay during Black Lives Matter back in like 2013, 2014, and I went because I was curious, and the crowd wasn't doing anything. We were just marching, and they started shooting tear gas at us. And that was the first moment in my life where I was like, oh, actually, fuck the police. And that made a lot of things click for me. And then I started going night after night after that. And I think that's likely across the country. This is the first time that people are seeing real police violence. Because if you are in a more sheltered suburban life, this is pretty new for you.
Well, and everyone has a camera now too, right?
Watching
so this is the first real nationwide movement, since I would say probably since Occupy, that has been able to capture the imagination. And we didn't have the internet like we did back when Occupy took place.
Yeah.
It's a different beast now.
Well, and speaking of Occupy too, because this was another question that I had for you, Zach. I know this movement is pretty decentralized. So how has it been able to, or has it achieved any major policy goals, or what is the real intention behind it? What kind of reform do you think that this sort of movement could expect?
That's a good question.
Yeah, man, you guys got some good questions. I love that. There was in terms of kind of what to expect and how is it organized. So it's really just organized. Honestly, 99.9% is on Facebook. A lot of people on the right are saying, well, hold on a second, there's got to be somebody funding it. Dude, it's literally people creating signs on their front yard that says $10 for a Black Lives Matter shirt with your name on it or something. And like, that's how they fund these sorts of things. There's nothing specifically, there's no one's getting paid by Soros, in which case I think some of us would have already seen a lot of checks from that, but no. And so it's organized. It's really just, it's as common as, hey, what are you doing tonight? I don't know. I'm thinking about going to the protest again. Okay, cool. Are you going? Sure. Done. That's it. In terms of the policy goals, there's a couple different ideas as to what should happen as a result. One popular goal is Campaign Zero, which was saying there's certain principles that we should all try to support. For example, in qualified immunity. So that's essentially where police officers aren't eligible to get sued because of they're violating someone's civil liberties. So for example, if they arrest a protester and then spit on the protester, there's nothing the protester can do in retaliation other than report it to the police department, which most of the time, I think it's 2/3 of the time, it doesn't lead to any sort of any sort of action. And so that's one specific thing that they could do. Or, reallocate that funding towards something like better police training, and maybe demilitarize the police and use that for more social workers, things along those lines. And so Campaign Zero is a website that's really good to go to. So that's the one camp. The other camp is saying that we should completely abolish the police altogether. So bring the funds completely down to zero, and that's it. Completely replace them with some sort of other structure like social workers and things, which I'm not in that camp, especially as I see kind of how Portland is unfolded. But yeah, there absolutely needs to be, specific policy changes. The only thing that Portland has done up to this point, from my understanding, is they defunded the Portland police by a couple $1 million out of their I forgot what the exact budget is. I don't know if somebody can pull this up. I think it's like somewhere in the ballpark of like 100 million, maybe less.
Yeah.
And so
well, it's like the same thing New York City did, right? Where it's like, oh, we're going to decrease it by $2 million. And everyone's like, oh shit, that's huge. And then you look at the whole budget and you're like, it's a drop in the freaking, drop in the river, right? A drop in the ocean.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, is because it's like, with all this craziness going on, it's important to remember there hasn't really been any sort of changes. And that's because Ted Wheeler is literally the guy who's the mayor and at the same time the police commissioner. If nobody can see an issue with that, then this is insane. And on top of that too, we're not going to rely on, obviously Trump brought the federal troops in, which was crazy. And then Biden has the crime bill, and then Kamala, she was a corrupt prosecutor. So it's like, where are we going to be able to do anything to create some sort of change?
We're screwed. I mean, that's we're kind of screwed. So, and that's kind of somewhere else I kind of wanted to go. When I think about organizing, we were talking with with a German the other week, and he made an interesting point that the left wins when we organize. And I think that's definitely the case, right? Obama put together one of the largest national organized movements that has ever been created, and then quashed it, like just suffocated it with a pillow. But that's what he did. OFA was an incredible organism, and he fucking just was like, Netflix is going to give me $1 billion. But we do win when we organize. And for me, education is such an important aspect to the organizational, organism that is left, polish the agenda shooting forward. So kind of like what does the organizing on the ground, and then are there like educational opportunities? Because I imagine there's a bunch of people who are just like, I'm angry, I don't know what to do, but I know I need to do something. And so is that energy being harnessed into some productive tendencies?
No, no. A lot of
Okay.
times what happens is they get upset and they need to learn about the situation. So a lot of times what it really breaks down to is people hanging out in a couple, I'm not going to name the bars. There's like a handful of very specific bars everybody goes to and talks
Right.
about these things. And that's kind of where it leaves off. And so a lot of times the use of violence is because they simply just don't know what else to do. But
Right.
when I start to talk about, well, there's something called nonviolent action, which is different from passivity, which is a technique used by Martin Luther King and Gandhi, which is
Right.
different than, say, Malcolm X. And if you
Yeah.
look at the probability of a group, like a group that would be considered violent extremists, the probability that they'll be able to get in power as a result of using said violence is it's almost exactly 0%. So, for example, with groups like the Muslim Brotherhood back in the 70s when they were violent, and the NRA or the IRA in Ireland,
Right.
what they ended up having to do was they had to kind of change their tactics and resort to nonviolent means in order to get into governance. And so I think what happens is, as people are starting to understand kind of where is it that we should move this organization, or this movement, I should say, it's important to remember that what we need is we also need to garner support from the masses and not just with our side. And that comes from not using violence, because that is that's not a beneficial option. And so it's fun to sock people in their mouth, but it's not too much more beneficial. And
Right.
a lot of times they'll use with the Nazis back in the day. And well, what happens if they had a violent uprising? It's like, well, the Nazis also, by the time they got in power and started to change things, it stopped becoming a democratic, governance. Bernie Sanders he's my guy. And we actually didn't show up for him in nearly the numbers after he won. Was at Nevada? People kind of stopped showing up so much. And so I think what we need to do is we need to kind of better understand what can we do to mobilize people that isn't violent. And I can go into details about nonviolent action as well, like kind of what that looks like, but there's no real educational opportunities for people to even learn this right now.
Do you think party politics is where this goes? Because like you were saying, the IRA went into, what is it, Sinn Féin now, where it's a party, right? It's a party in the Irish Parliament that were some of them former IRA members who probably killed people, right? They probably did kill some North Irish people, Protestants. So and not that I'm saying anything like that is what's going on here in the States, of course, but just, do you think, is party politics the answer? And then how, maybe you have some kind of localized party that is able to do something, but how does that step into kind of a national being?
Yeah, I would say, so another group that I'm a part of is the Justice Democrats. And so that's one thing that I've been doing that for a number of years. I think it's honestly having to do with like DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. They're really big here. And I think honestly what it is it's trying to change those groups into supporting something like Justice Democrats. I think party politics, I think that's a good method if we are to be careful about that. Right now, what's happening from the trends like nationally is the fact that a lot of people, like for example Biden, they're not trying to accommodate to the left. What, for many reasons, right? One thing is because Medicare for all they believe it to be too expensive, even though we gave Amazon a negative 1.2% federal tax rate last year, which was insane, and $3 trillion tax break. But I digress. And so I think what happens is we need to try to push people to the voting polls, but also join a party. Most people outside of kind of our bubbles don't really know what Justice Democrats are. They know who AOC is. They know who Ilhan Omar is, but they don't really know too much more outside of that. And I think it's honestly just trying to get that attention out there and have people know, hey, this is the party that you should be going to. I mean, Nina Turner is somebody who kind of captivates everybody's attention, but nobody really knows who she is.
Do you think she runs? I heard there's some 2024 some talk. Does she run?
You know what?
What does she run for? More importantly, does she run for president? I doubt it, but maybe senator.
You just took the words away from me. I was about to say that. I think she's probably, if she does, it's going to be senator for now. And what she runs on, I think she's going to have to start focusing more on the economic aspect of what's going on right now. Take a half step away from the culture war, because that doesn't appeal to some of the more conservatives. But if you say, hey, for example, there was just a bill that was passed where the EPA is dropping their regulations, and so the coal mining factory, they get to save, I think it was $200 million, and what is it, 1.2 or 1.3 million people's water is going to get polluted here pretty soon. Hey, I think we can all agree that's something that we should probably stop. I think that's the way to be able to captivate that kind of attention and take a step away from the culture war.
Yeah. No, that's definitely interesting. And you touched on Kamala Harris a little bit. I was curious to get your opinion on that too. Just
oh my god!
I was gonna say you did a whole show about Kamala.
Man.
I was like, he's pissed.
Oh man, there's not a whole lot of people that just truly piss me off. But I've done a couple on her, and actually, there's a local. So the show plays on like 6 local stations here. And so it's funny because on YouTube, it'll get like a few views here and there if YouTube doesn't cut them. But then on TV, it's like 500,000 views on episode. I'm like, wait, what the hell is this? What is going on here?
That's cool.
And I don't want to like hit up the Young Turks and ask them for like an endorsement or something right now. I kind of just want to build up my own, and just kind of see where I go before I start to ask people. Kamala Harris, she is about as cutthroat of a moderate Republican to like a establishment Democrat as you can possibly get. I mean, there's literally, she just supported the legalization of marijuana here. Was that a couple years ago? I mean, pretty much every situation she's been on the wrong end of. I mean, there's even a guy who they falsely imprisoned for killing.
Kind of like Joe Biden, right? Kind of like Joe Biden.
God, yeah, seriously. And it's like, so even with that individual, so he goes to San Quentin prison, he gets freaking stabbed. He gets out. She puts him back into prison because he was late on his paperwork. It's like, he just got out of prison. Give him a couple days. Jesus. So she's a stone. Again, I don't even want to get into like specific all the details, but she is about as cutthroat in terms of the criminal justice system as it gets. And so when you're talking about, hey, what is something that we can do to get people to relax in Portland and maybe not want to throw a Molotov cocktail? It's like, maybe don't have the person who created the crime bill and somebody who's notorious for a corrupt prosecutor be the person you have to vote for, so it's not Trump. That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Dude, blue no matter who, though, right? Blue no matter who.
I hate that.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. It makes me, I'm like, maybe I'll pull a lever for Trump. I hate that slogan so much.
Just despite the people that...
Yeah, just despite that slogan. Yeah. I hate it.
Yeah.
Oh,
no, it does matter. It very much matters, too.
Yeah. But in the conversations you're having, because like you were saying, I think that Biden's campaign strategy right now is, well, yes, we're not really giving the left anything at all, but they hate Trump so much they'll come to us anyway. So we have to stay, as center as possible, even, edge to the right quite a bit, so that we can get the suburban moms. But, my fear with that strategy is, one, it screws people like myself.
Those suburban white ladies, man.
We don't get
Everybody
shit.
wants them. Everybody wants those suburban
Everybody.
white ladies.
You gotta get the soccer moms, man.
You gotta get you a mom with a minivan, dude. That's
don't like
classic.
But
that's classic.
My problem with it is that just in someone who has the mindset that I have, like, I don't think that's going to be a good enough selling point of just I'm not Trump. So in your kind of barroom conversations with the people who are in this, do you see them pulling that lever come November for Biden? Because I think it's going to be a hard choice.
never going to happen. No way. So the thing is, it's like, for me, like, my own personal opinion is that I'll take the sock to the junk, and I'll go ahead. for this, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna vote because of the fact that I'm hoping to God he does something more for climate change. But let me be very clear: there's a difference between voting for him and campaigning for him, because that's why I'm so vocal. I'm like, dude, he's practically in all other elections, he'd be one of the other antichrists here. Now, my question: there's a couple things that I have to worry about. One of which is, what is going to happen when Trump isn't the opposing candidate? So, for example, if there's going to be, say, your run of the mill. By the way, I apologize if you can hear a kid right now. They're like packing and stuff.
All good.
Yeah.
There's a run of the mill Republican. What's going to happen when the Democrats have to go against someone who's not Trump? Because we remember everything. We're going to say, oh, okay, cool. So, hey, guess what? Those guys are definitely going to get our votes because they're the Antichrist, but we're fighting them like head on. We know we're fighting them. It's a fight, but you guys are kind of like trying to blindside us with a punch to the back of the head as we're trying to, to try to make a difference. And so I think there's going to be, I don't know, probably like a couple people out of thousands that might vote for Biden who are a part of the actual protest, if I were to guess right off the top of my head.
So as far as the protest movement and the real left-wing movement in this country, what's your opinion on how they would flourish under either a second Trump term versus a Biden term? Because there's something about having Trump in the White House as an image to unify against. And he says the shit that they're supposed to say quietly so loud that it's easy for everybody to see what's wrong with it. And it's almost sinister when you have a
almost everyone, right? Almost everyone.
Well, sure, yeah. It's sinister though when you have a Democrat or somebody else in office who is less divisive, that a lot of the shitty things that go on in government go unnoticed, or there's no attention brought to it. So, what are your thoughts on how a real left-wing movement can continue to grow in those two scenarios?
I would say there's a couple different ideas for that. One thing that I like to do is I like to reflect on kind of what's going on internationally. Now, when the United States, when we're involved in any country, and it's not even the United States, it could even be like Ethiopia in Somalia, when there's a group that you view as occupying yourself. So, for example, when Trump brought in the federal troops, you instantly, no matter what your politics are, you're going to garner more support because you're just not that. And so, obviously, with the movement, the protests, I think that the left is going to garner more attention as a result of Trump. However, I don't know if the protest sizes will necessarily get any smaller if Biden were in, because of the fact that the people who are there are a lot of times like Justice Democrats, Democratic Socialists. And what we do is when we see Biden and we're saying, hey, look at that, establishment Democrats, you got what you want. Did anything change? Are we getting anything changing?
Right.
No, didn't think so. Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say, yeah, and the other confusing part too that nobody's even talking about is it's just how the fires are going to affect elections here and affect the mobilization of people and the conflict, because pretty much the regions in Oregon, that are caught on fire, those are conservative dominated cities. And so they're going to have to move upwards. And the more north you go, the more essentially the more liberal it gets, like the more lefty it gets. And so Portland is pretty far north. And so eventually people are going to work their way into Portland. So we're talking about, if you think the fighting is bad now, man, if these fires give it a few more days or weeks, if this continues and they get forced all the way up to Portland, now we're talking about some real serious violence.
Yeah, no, and that is an interesting point that I had not thought about. What happens when all those people start floating north, which brings me to another piece I wanted to ask you about too. With there seems to be a rise in the right-wing and alt-right protesters showing up during a lot of these protests, be it Portland or the infamous shooting in Kenosha now, and there was a shooting in Portland as well. What have you seen in regards to any Boogaloo militia or just general alt-right folks showing up and causing conflict? And because it sounds like it's most likely going to get worse from here.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple. It's weird because I've seen it in two different ways. So one way is that I've seen a lot of them show up to the Black Lives Matter protests, and I know, and they'll be dressed in black as well. And the reason why I know that they're the part of the alt-right is because I've covered the alt-right protests and I've seen them in their whole Trump garb, and I've talked to them, and then I see them dressed as Black Lives Matter as well. And I'll even look at them and I'll be like, I'll point to them. I'll point them out and be like, are you seriously here dressed as a Black Lives Matter person? And they'll look away. When I pull up my camera, they can see me turning on my camera. They'll run. They'll just go far away, and they'll stay there. I've seen them multiple days. And this is not just like one or two people. These are massive groups there. And so you also have to wonder how many people committing the violence there, how many of them are actually a part of the movement or not, which is another question. But yeah, the groups here, like the Proud Boys and some of the other people on the alt-right, they really started to try to become more vocal in the cities around Portland. So there's a lot of times they'll say, okay, well, we can't really deal with Portland, and we want to show that we're not violent. And so we'll go to Salem, where we can be like non-violent. But what happens as a result is that then they'll say beat up and tackle and mace people who just have signs and are just walking around with just like, normal signs saying Black Lives Matter, and they'll beat them instead. So yeah, they've become more vocal, but they're also coming from farther areas, not even just like an hour away from Portland. They'll come from out of state, way more than I've seen anybody come from a, Black Lives Matter support the protest come out of state.
Yeah. Well, in response to that sort of armed group showing up at protests, or just generally knowing that it is a possibility, especially post Kenosha, have you seen or have you heard rumblings of the left and the groups that are showing up at this protest arming themselves in any way?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like taken back because you guys you're hitting on like all the perfect angles here. Yeah, that's a fascinating aspect that's also changed, is because in Portland, originally these people were not so interested in arming oneself. They're more towards kind of gun regulations. A lot of them are pretty far in saying we shouldn't have any guns. But then that's changed, and now I've seen a whole lot of people getting their concealed carry license now and are buying rifles. And I actually asked, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I asked one person who's now a gun advocate, what was with the change of heart? And what they said is originally they were worried about the death and chaos that could be attributed to weapons, but now we feel that chaos is more inevitable on a larger scale, regardless of what we decide to do. So they're actually taking a more conservative approach in response to the new conflict going on.
Right.
Yeah. One of the biggest arguments I've heard too from more left-wing folks who are starting to arm themselves is community defense over personal defense. So it's we are surrounded by
tanky, baby, super tanky. I like it.
Yeah, well, it's like, should only one side have guns? Because what if I do need to protect my community?
Get a motherfucking tank, dude. That's what I'm talking about.
Are they selling those yet? I feel like at a surplus store.
I know a guy in the Ukraine, dude. I'll call him up. We might be able to get a tank down here.
Didn't Schwarzenegger buy a tank, or am I making that up?
No, he had one of the original Humvees.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I could kind of change directions here a little bit, because this is I would love to get your take on this, especially as somebody who has been kind of in and around the media. One thing I always say is that we haven't learned our lesson from Donald Trump. And I think that's going to be, us as a society, us as a Democratic left-leaning party. The media hasn't learned, like all these groups of people have not learned the lessons that Donald Trump, I think, was, kind of there to teach us. And so I think because of that, in 4, 8, 12 years, we're going to have an even worse person in there that is going to be able to manipulate the system in such a way that we thought bad things happened under Trump, that it's kids play. And so what are some of the lessons that you've learned and from somebody like Trump, especially if we're thinking about the media? Has he, from when you started to now, are you doing things differently in reaction to Trump and kind of the everyday mudsling and reacting to the media, reacting to Trump and things like, the Bob Woodward story going on right now, I think is a great example of that. That's not going to do shit in 2 weeks. We're going to forget it. We're going to forget this happened.
Yeah.
The funny aspect about that is because before the 2016 election, I actually worked in politics. So I was working for Oregon Senator. And what I learned was how political individuals are able to manipulate the media and exactly behind the scenes. How do you do that? And they actually have like a little database that they use, and they track like, okay, so if I go on CNN today and if I say, Iran is bad and we should go and go to war with them, then I can track the amount of people that are talking, because people will call and you'll track who says what, and you'll put it into a system. You'll say, okay, what are the top issues? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, where do they stand? Yes, invade. No, don't invade. And they'll have a whole system with that. What I learned right after that experience was that, for God's sake, stop freaking talking like you're clutching your pearls every time he says something. Like, okay, I get it. He mentioned, take one for the team for, with Kim Jong-un, right? And so it's like, okay, that's bad. But what's also bad is the very freaking thing that nobody knows about, like over 1 million people who are going to get contaminated water. And so one thing that I've learned personally, especially from politics early on, is to focus on the policy, because people can call fake news. But if you say, hey, here's all of these different sites. Look, are you better off now than you were in the past? Probably not. Do you know somebody that was laid off? Okay, this is why somebody was laid off. Did you know that this is the reason why nobody has clean drinking water? Do you think that there's something called the Afghanistan papers came out? Do you trust the generals? Okay, you do trust the generals. Well, they just actually came out, and what they thought was an undisclosed, classified document saying that the Afghanistan war is unwinnable. Do you think our troops should die because we should stay there? So I think if you get rid of the culture war, as opposed to, like, I know people who work in like Associated Press and Politico, and they're talking about the culture there, and everybody's like, oh, I can't believe he said that. And it's like, dude, nobody gives a shit when you're outside of your bubble. But when you're talking to, say, for example, conservatives, they don't care what he has to say. What they care about is, am I better off now than I was in the past? And the answer is no. The answer is not. And so if you're focusing on policy in the media, specific facts, and get away from the culture war, I think that's what everybody should be learning. And so that's what I've been trying, as much as, if, sometimes I can't resist, but I try as much as possible to kind of shift away from just kind of all that sensationalistic just shit.
Yeah. Which is a great point. Cause I mean, these guys know I fall into it too, and then they just give me shit for it. Where you just, it's hard not to sometimes. But do you think that the mainstream media is salvageable? Because I think one of the biggest issues is that it is so corporatized, and everyone is just trying to turn a profit. And Trump plays. He gets the clicks. He gets the eyes on the television. And that's why, Rachel Maddow is just talking about him every day. And everyone, like you said, is constantly pearl clutching.
I mean, her Russiagate shit was, was awful.
Her web was just amazing, what she was able to just build every day.
It was the Charlie Day in the basement, dude. Like, Pepe Sylvia. And you're like, oh my God, like, stop it, please.
Yeah. But with the media in its current form, I mean, how do you see it reforming itself? Like, is it possible for them to start taking a more nuanced approach like you described?
I used to work in Eugene, so it's like Portland and Salem. Yeah. Eugene's kind of farther down south, and I used to work at a paper there, so I was the editor. So I had to learn about the business side of things as well as the editing side of things. So how are you able to harmonize the two together? And because a lot of times what happens is, if, say, for example, if I'm talking, this didn't happen, thankfully, because Oregon's like super left and they wouldn't endorse us. But if a fossil fuel company was endorsing you and you're writing a story about the fossil fuel industry, you kind of have to say, hey, I'm going to publish this, but I want to give you a heads up so you can already come out with a statement. I'm going to publish it on this day. They're going to have to take a loss somewhere, because they're slowly dying. And so what I think what's happening is they're kind of like the frog in the water, where it slowly, gets hotter and hotter and they don't realize it. I think they're going to have to take a loss. And I think what they're going to have to do is they're going to find a way to take a massive financial loss and start reporting real news. So for example, the Afghanistan papers, that was leaked by the Washington Post. It was a real big deal. And I was like, wow, this is crazy, because there's I think it was 200 officials in charge of the war-making process, from Bush to Obama to President Trump. And there's undeniable facts in there as a result. I'm like, that's crazy. Okay, that's pretty cool. But what they're doing right now is they're slowly killing themselves because nobody trusts them. I think it's 19% of the American population, last I checked, that trusts the media. And so they're going to have to take a loss.
They have Congress level approval rating.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
That's insane.
Is it salvageable? I think It is, but I think they're going to have to do a complete pivot, complete turn. For example, with what is that show called by the hill, The Rising? Is that
Oh
it?
yeah, dude.
Rising.
Yeah. Perfect
Sangar
example.
and Jetty. Help me out here, John. And
Crystal Ball.
Yeah,
Crystal Ball. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to salvage something. Is something like that, because you're like, wow, that's actually a pretty good approach. I'm not going to lie. All right, not bad. So I think if they're for example, they're going to say, okay, well, how are we going to get more views? Because there's some left platforms like Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk, who's clearly beaten us in ratings in some episodes. Okay, well, why don't we find a next up and comer in that? Why don't we try to have him on a show and kind of have two different types of shows similarly on our own platform? And I think honestly, having that and then focus on pure reporting on the side and stop mixing your reporting with commentary. That's for like weirdos on YouTube like myself. If you're on on a platform, you're reporting or you're commentating. You don't mix the two. I think that's the only way that they can move forward. What about you guys? Do you think that this is a dying breed, or think it can change?
Well, I'll just give my 2 cents real quick, and then John, I know you'll have thoughts. But what I see happening with most sections of society is just pure decentralization, right? Decentralization of finance, decentralization of media, and decentralization of news. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about watching your channel is it's someone who's actually on the ground, and not trying to cut a video to just get as many clicks as possible, or to be as radical as possible. It's you actually having conversations with people.
And how many clips have we seen from, they're like, look at this building on fire. It's like, that's from Spain. Or, you know what I mean? It's like, you don't have anyone, they don't have people anymore. Everyone's in the newsroom in Washington, D.C. There's no beat reporters.
Well, and Matt Taibbi has talked about this a lot, but just how as these news corporations lose money, some of the first things that they start cutting is, number one, having people in these locations, because they're like, why would we? Everyone's just centralized. Mm-hmm. But then number two, they've started cutting out fact checkers. So yeah, there's pictures of things that aren't actually there. But being able to decentralize the media, it does have bad side effects, but I think that overall, if we can learn to use it appropriately, it can be incredibly positive, because we no longer have to go to CNN to learn what's happening in Portland. I can go check out your channel, and I can go check out other reporters who are on the ground, and it's now democratized in a way that you couldn't see before. So in my mind, our current news system almost has to break, because I don't know if corporatist capitalist, CNN, MSNBC system is going to be able to adapt to a world that is not running at an 11 every single day. It's like the world's not always burning down. Can we just breathe for a second?
This year.
Just these 4 years, because existential threat and stuff, but blue no matter who.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And one person who I just absolutely cannot stand with a passion, by the way, I don't know if you guys heard of him. He went to the Joe Rogan Experience, Andy No. He and I have had a fair amount of back and forth. So he's a guy who likes to report on some of the news in Portland. He was known because some individuals, I think it was like a year or two ago, they hit him with like milkshakes. I think some had cement, and they messed him up pretty bad. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. So that guy, he'll misreport a lot of the news that I'm actually there as well. And I'll call him out on it, and we'll have a back and forth about that. Because, for example, he'll say little things like, look at Portland trying to create their own Chaz, and look how it's failing miserably. And it's like, well, no, I was actually there. It was one part a joke. And the police told us not to touch the fence. So people are like, well, if I can't touch the fence, I might as well just take the whole fence as an FU. So they decided to just pull the whole fence off. And then Andy No takes that little soundbite. It's like, look, they're trying to create a Chaz. Like, no, they're not. They're just taking the fence because they're told not to touch it. That was it. That's the story. And then Donald Trump Jr. actually started to retweet all of that stuff as well. I'm like, hold on a second. You guys have no idea what's actually going on. That's why it lasted for a day. It's not because the police overpowered the protesters. The protesters are cool with getting beat. They're just going to go back and try it again if they really wanted to do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that even the decentralized, kind of on the ground, independent reporters, you get a lot of grifters in that, just as you do in the more established media institutions. So that's a good point. And then it sort of that information gets laundered through social media up to the highest echelons, where the son of the president is tweeting something completely divorced from reality.
Yeah, but at this point, what is reality anymore? And it's what we make it.
Yeah, reality is a meme.
Yeah, the beauty of the internet is that you can now find your own little siloed reality, as opposed to everyone's reality used to exist on 3 channels on television, or in your local newspaper. And now everyone has their own reality they can just pick and choose from.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm still going to be very interested to see kind of like what happens in Oregon from this point forward. And I was like, the running joke in Portland is like, oh, look at that, there's fires. Let's see how many times people are going to say fires don't exist and they don't believe in them. So yeah,
Right.
I mean, well, we'll see what happens with everything, said and done between the protests. I'll be very curious to see how the protests change as a result of the fires. I don't think they're going to stop. Let's just be very clear. The police were told not to use CS gas during this time. I would strongly doubt that they'll follow that, because every time they've been told not to use CS gas or tear gas, every time they've been told not to do it so far, just kind of as an FU to everybody, they'll use them anyway. So we'll see how that escalates everything.
CS being highly flammable as well. It started a number of fires, right? Just like in the history of the police using CS.
Yeah, they're not. It's kind of weird because it'll definitely catch on fire if it's already in fire. Otherwise, it's not so much like a gasoline where it's easily ignitable, but it does catch fire. Sometimes there will be like a Molotov cocktail thrown. There's like a flame, and the police will just roll a CS gas canister. They'll roll it into the Molotov, and then it'll create like a little fireball of sorts.
Fun. That's a great thing to have happening during wildfire season. Well,
yeah, beautiful.
Damn. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on time. Did anyone have any last comments or last questions or anything?
So just kind of quickly, who do you think are some of the, and it can be on the right, the left, the center, who are some of the folks in the media that you think are doing some of the best work? So I know you mentioned The Rising on the Hill. What other programs or groups or specific shows or maybe individuals are doing some of the best work out there, do you think?
Yeah, I would say there's Rising is definitely a good one. I really like Secular Talk and Kyle Kolinsky. That's kind of where I get a lot of, that's actually where I started, as a matter of fact. In politics going way back, I actually watched him while I was going through at the University of Oregon. I was like, wow, this is actually a good point. These things are important. I was like, I should probably get involved as well. So it's actually as a result of him that I started to get into this anyway. Other than that, I haven't followed too many individuals. A lot of the stuff because being a nerd, I follow mostly like the stuff on the academic side. The only person that I can name off a name was this guy he's Andy Fields. He's at the Associated Press. He's a cool guy. I've actually met him a few times. He's actually really cool. It's not like left or right. It's just, he just gives the fact, like that's it. It's just facts, done. And I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. So the fact that he's
is
so
one
objective,
of the only groups out there doing, straight on reporting pretty much. It's like them and Reuters.
He's pretty objective, and that's what I really like about that. I actually don't know his political leanings, to be honest. It's just like that's it. So I mostly focus on him. Other than that, not so much. I've met a couple guys from The Intercept. I think The Intercept is doing some pretty good work here and there. But yeah, I would have to say that's about it. What about you guys? Do you have any specific individuals that you really like to follow?
Matt Taibbi, I think he does a lot of work.
Matt's up there for me.
Very interesting. Secular Talk, I love Kyle Kolinsky. I've been watching him for years. And then I like to explore. I just kind of get on YouTube. I'm a YouTube guy, so I'll just kind of search around and explore a little bit. I like Kim Iverson. I don't know if you've ever seen her. No,
I haven't.
Yeah, check her out. She's got some very interesting, very knowledgeable about geopolitics. Doesn't cover domestic issues so much, but definitely give her a listen.
Nice. Okay, sounds good. Oh, and Be with the Fifth. I don't know if you guys ever heard it. It's like BEBEU or BEAU of the Fifth. God, that guy, I've actually talked to him. He's pretty much exactly how he is on camera too. He's like a super cool guy. He's always like hitting you from different angles. Every time he's mentioning the same topic everybody else talks about, he'll come about it in such a weird angle. I'm like, damn, that's a good point. Yeah, if they do, push out the protesters from the city, they will actually go to the suburbs because that's the only place to go. Oh, I didn't think about that.
True. I'm now kind of terrified for that to happen. But I know you got some packing to get to, so we'll close out there. Do you have any pluggables that you want to bring up?
Honestly, it's just if you guys want to check out my channel, that's pretty much it. Honestly, it's just the Zach Moss Show on YouTube or Zach Moss 6 on Twitter. I just post all my sources. So if you call fake news on my happy self, there it is. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I know it's funny. I'm like looking around. You can like smell the smoke radiating in here. I was like, screw it. No, we got to do this anyway. We'll make the time.
Horrifying.
That's awesome,
Dude,
man. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome.
Yeah, no worries. It is all good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate the time, and y'all stay safe. Get out of there with plenty of time to avoid the fires.
I know. Thank you. I'll talk to you guys later. I'm gonna get the fuck out of here.
All right.
All right. Later, guys.
See you, Zach.
All right.